Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Good to be here.
Today we're doing just that, really peeling back the layers on a stack of documents you've shared with us. We're delving into a fascinating and, well, often shadowy world of secret societies and interconnected movements, mostly focusing on the 19th and early 20th centuries, because that's what's detailed in this source material.
That's right. And you can almost think of it like charting a complex map.
Yeah.
These sources describe, well, hidden streams flowing beneath the surface of the historical events we usually hear about.
Right.
They paint a picture where these groups weren't just, isolated clubs, but potentially linked forces, shaping the past, sometimes with very deliberate intent, hidden agendas.
Exactly. So our mission here is basically to take this material you've given us, extract the key insights, maybe some surprising connections, and the reported aims from these specific sources.
A shortcut, really.
Yeah, a shortcut to understanding the intricate web of influence they describe. We've got accounts here of revolutionary groups, mystic orders, political organizations, even financial powers.
And they're all described in this material as potentially connected somehow.
Right, sometimes operating together even when their public faces seem totally different.
It's quite a collection of claims suggesting a level of coordination that definitely challenges the conventional historical narratives. The sources imply these links aren't always obvious, sometimes deliberately hidden, with groups maybe acting in concert even if their stated goals seem miles apart.
Okay, well, let's unpack this stack then and see what these sources reveal about the forces that, according to them, were shaping history and maybe, just maybe, contain echoes that reach into today.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Let's start by laying some groundwork. The source material vividly describes the situation in Ireland, particularly the harsh environment created by repressive laws against Catholics back in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Ah, yes, the penal laws. The sources really detail a series of these designed to, well, restrict the lives and influence of Catholics quite severely. Well, for example, the material describes how a Catholic landowner couldn't simply bequeath their land as they pleased.
Right.
The law, as it's presented here, said his land had to be divided equally among all his children when he died.
Unless
Unless the eldest son converted to Protestantism. Then he inherited everything, and the father, the Catholic father, was essentially reduced to just a life tenant on his own property from that point on.
Yeah.
Couldn't sell it, couldn't mortgage it.
Wow. So basically incentivizing conversion through land ownership itself, that's direct legal pressure.
It was, and the sources show it went much deeper into personal and family life, too.
Like how?
If a Catholic man's wife decided to abandon his religion, become Protestant, she was immediately freed from his legal control.
Just like that.
Just like that. And even more, the chancellor, a top legal official, could step in and assign her a chunk of her husband's property.
Unbelievable.
And similarly, if a child, didn't matter how young, professed to be Protestant, they could be legally taken from the father's care. Yes. And again, the chancellor had the power to assign that child a portion of the father's property.
So conversion could literally break up families and seize assets. And I think the sources also mentioned Catholics being barred from guardian roles.
Precisely. No Catholic, according to these laws described in the source, could be a guardian, not even to their own children, let alone anyone else's. And then the religious laws themselves, converting a Protestant to Catholicism was a capital offense, punishable by death.
A capital offense.
That's what the source states. And strictly, no Catholic was allowed to marry a Protestant. It's painted as a really systematic legal effort to dismantle Catholic land ownership, restrict their religion, and undermine family authority.
It's completely understandable then that an environment that repressive would breed resistance.
Right.
Secret societies often pop up in those conditions, don't they? Providing that underground space to organize.
Exactly. And the sources mention some early Irish secret societies reacting to this very environment.
Like the United Irishmen.
Yes, the material introduces the United Irishmen. They're described as being founded with influence drawn straight from the French Revolution, especially its Jacobin ideals.
Okay.
Samuel Nielsen, a key figure, founder of the Northern Star, which the sources say was the Society's first newspaper, is even called the Jacobin in Wolfe Tone's autobiography, which is referenced here.
Right, Tone being another major figure. And the account of their activities in the source seems to end quite suddenly, doesn't it? With a note about a specific diary entry from Tone.
It does. It mentions an order for Tone to cut cable and put to sea immediately on a ship called the Indomitable. The narrative in the source kind of just shifts right after mentioning that entry.
Okay. So it doesn't elaborate much beyond that point in this particular account.
No, it just notes it as the point where the United Irishmen's active presence in this specific account seems to wrap up. Now, parallel to them, and often in violent conflict with them, were groups that eventually came together as the Orange Society.
Ah, the Irishmen. The sources link their origins to groups like the Peep Day Boys.
Right. That's right. The source cites information, supposedly from a Captain Pollard, about a key meeting. It happened on the evening of the Battle of the Diamond at Thomas Wilson's house in Loughgall.
And that's where the name changed.
It was at that meeting, according to this specific account, that the society's name was formally changed to the Orange Society. They apparently initiated a Grand Lodge and various local lodges right then and there.
And the rituals they used, the source says they were based on Freemasonry.
Yes, the source states quite explicitly their ritual was founded on Freemasonry, specifically mentioning the York Rite. The legend they reportedly used was that of the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt.
Okay.
Now, a key point the sources make here is the big shift that happened with this change to Orangism. The original Peep Day Society had been mostly, lower-class Protestants.
Right.
But with the formal adoption of Orangism, the upper classes started joining and taking leadership roles.
And the source makes a very interesting and potentially, pretty explosive claim here, that the Orange Society was actually secretly fostered by the government as a counterbalance against the United Irishmen.
That is a significant assertion made in this material. It suggests a state hand in promoting one secret society, maybe even helping it adopt structures like Freemasonry, specifically to counteract another perceived seditious group.
That's quite a claim.
It is. And the sources then highlight just how big the Orange Society apparently got. By 1835, they claim no less than 140,000 Orangemen in England alone.
140,000 in England.
That's the number given, with 40,000 supposedly just in London.
That's a massive presence for a secret society in England at that time.
Yeah.
And their leadership included some pretty high-profile names.
Oh, yes. From 1828, the Grand Master was none other than the Duke of Cumberland.
The king's brother.
The brother of King William IV, yes. The source identifies a Mr. Fairman, the secretary, as the main driving force, the sort of ruling spirit behind the scenes at this time. He's described as working to build this really widespread conspiracy, reportedly setting up 381 loyal lodges in Great Britain, another 30 within the army itself, and branches in many colonies, too.
A truly sprawling network, then, even involving the military structure of the British Empire.
It was, according to this account. The source states this conspiracy thrived from 1828 until 1835.
What happened then?
It was exposed by a Mr. Hume, a member of Parliament. This led to a committee of inquiry in the House of Commons.
Ah, so it came out into the open.
Well, sort of. The sources note, rather pointedly, that as the conspiracy, however, implicated half the Tory peers, some of the bishops, and most of the army, everything passed off quietly.
Passed off quietly.
Yeah.
Despite implicating all those powerful people.
That's what the source says. And it presents that quiet handling as evidence in itself of a powerful network, able to basically squash the consequences of its own exposure.
Powerful indeed, if true. Now, what about the other side of the conflict in Ireland? The source mentioned groups like the White Boys.
Yes, the White Boys, also known as levelers sometimes, are described along with the Ribbonmen, who eventually became the St. Patrick's Boys. They are consistently shown as being politically and practically at war with the Orangemen.
And their methods.
Their methods, according to the source, were pretty brutal, focused on intimidation. It uses strong language. Outrage, terrorism, and murder being their only methods of political conversion.
Those are very harsh words.
Yeah.
Portraying them as purely violent.
They are. It definitely reflects the source's perspective on these groups. The sources also note that this group, the Ribbonmen, despite being Catholic, was eventually excommunicated by the Catholic Church itself because their methods were so violent.
Excommunicated.
Yes. And this led, according to the source, to an official name change in 1825 to the St. Patrick's Fraternal Organization, or the St. Patrick's Boys. It shows how severe even the church thought their tactics were.
So right from the start, these sources are showing us secret societies deep in political and social conflict, some allegedly backed by the government, others using extreme violence, even facing condemnation from their own church. It sets a pretty complex, often brutal stage.
Absolutely. A stage set for the kind of hidden forces this material describes operating throughout history.
Okay, let's shift focus now beyond Ireland. These sources describe a whole landscape of revolutionary currents and secret associations swirling across Europe, especially after the French Revolution and through the 19th century. This material portrays them as interconnected forces, pushing for big political changes.
Absolutely. One group that gets highlighted is the Philadelphians, also called the Olympians sometimes.
Okay, who were they?
According to this material, they were a royalist, anti-Bonapartist secret society founded on Masonic lines. The source puts their origin around 1798 in Besançon, France. It credits General Mallet with founding it and Lieutenant Colonel Udet, noted as a Freemason, with organizing it.
And they use England as a base. That seems like a recurring theme.
Yes, the sources state quite clearly they used England as a base of operations. That obviously gave them a degree of freedom to organize away from Napoleonic control on the continent. They're described as cooperating with various other groups. The material mentions Lieutenant Colonel Udet died on September 2nd from a wound he'd received earlier. Now, what's presented as particularly notable is the timing.
How so?
Just moments after Udet's death, the Senate in France declared Napoleon deposed.
Wow.
And the source claims this act carried out the program of the Olympians, directly linking the secret society's agenda to Napoleon's fall.
So, this secret royalist society's goals were achieved almost immediately after a key organizer died. That implies, well, either incredible effectiveness or maybe a conveniently timed coincidence that the source finds highly significant, suggesting their hidden work directly influenced Napoleon's downfall.
It strongly suggests a direct link, yes, painting that picture of hidden hands guiding history. Then we have Carbonarism, a movement that started in Italy but also spread significantly to France. It's a major subject in these sources.
This one seems to be presented as a really significant, long-lasting revolutionary force in the narrative here.
It is. The sources mention its early connection to Joachim Murat, Napoleon's brother-in-law, King of Naples. Apparently, he initially used the movement, but later turned against it and outlawed it. After Murat banned them, Carbonarism reportedly got support from England, specifically from the exiled Bourbons and figures like Lord William Bentinck, which suggests, international political maneuvering behind the scenes again.
Right.
The movement was later reorganized. Interestingly, a sort of breakaway sect called the Calderari, or Braziers, emerged. They were sworn enemies of both the Freemasons and the Carbonari, which highlights these internal divisions even within the world of secret societies.
Fascinating. And the Carbonari's ultimate aim, as stated in this source, it's quite stark, isn't it? Almost absolute.
It is. The source quotes what it presents as their final aim: the complete annihilation of Catholicism and ultimately of Christianity. That's the word used. It explicitly links this extreme anti-religious goal to philosophical currents associated with Voltaire and the, destructive forces of the French Revolution, as the source sees it.
Annihilation of Christianity, that's a dramatic, almost apocalyptic goal to attribute to them. The sources also mention some secret instructions that were highly valued.
Yes, Giuseppe Petroni. He's described as a young man at the time who later became a famous Mazzinian follower of Mazzini and eventually Grand Master Agunto of Roman Masonry in 1878. He's named as an author of their secret instructions.
And these instructions were valuable.
Apparently so. The sources mention that if these instructions were lost, the Freemasons offered fabulous sums for their recovery. This detail is used to underscore how sensitive these documents were, potentially revealing incriminating information, and it also suggests a close, maybe complex, relationship between high-level Freemasonry and the Carbonari.
So a direct link claimed between prominent Masonic figures and these Carbonari instructions with their, extreme anti-Christian aims, according to this material. What about French Carbonarism and the groups that came after or emerged from it?
The sources describe a kind of lineage of revolutionary groups in France. The Amis de la Vérité, Friends of Truth, reportedly merged into the Amis du Peuple, Friends of the People, which in turn became the Droits de l'Homme, Rights of Man, in 1832. This last group was apparently involved in an attempted assassination of King Louis Philippe in 1835, showing their violent side.
Right.
After that failed attempt, the remnants regrouped as the Société des Familles, Society of Families, led by well-known revolutionaries like Louis-Auguste Blanqui and Armand Barbes.
But the source claims Carbonarism itself had mostly faded in France by then.
Yes, it states that, according to a figure named Lucien de la Hode, Carbonarism in France had basically ceased to exist by 1822, except for a few stubborn individuals. Now, this Lucien de la Hode is a key figure for the source's narrative here.
Why is that?
He's described as having been an agent of the French secret police for 8 years, right before the 1848 revolution.
An inside source, then. And what was his role as described here?
The source uses de la Hode's account to expose what it calls the typical cynical structure of how revolutionary organizations, especially the dangerous ones, supposedly operate at their core. It describes a body of dupes whose particular job is genuinely to believe that their organization is the executive one.
The dupes, so the ordinary members.
Exactly. The well-meaning, maybe naive members who think they're driving the revolution. They're used, according to this view, to sort of steer away people of doubtful revolutionary integrity, probably those who might expose the real leaders or aims. Meanwhile, the source claims, citing de la Hode, the real agents do their savage work from a hidden level.
That's a deeply cynical view, that even within these revolutionary movements, there's an outer layer of genuine believers being manipulated by a hidden, more ruthless core.
That's precisely how this source presents it, drawing on de la Hode's supposed inside knowledge. It claims that a branch of this society, called the Société Dissidence, served the purpose of the Haute Vente, implying a higher coordinating body in 1848 by helping to terrorize Paris.
And this terror helped bring down the monarchy.
That's the claim, that this terror contributed directly to the fall of the monarchy that year.
And the provisional government that took over after the king abdicated. The source links them directly to these groups.
Yes, it lists the names of the self-appointed members of that provisional government. It specifically notes that Dupont de l'Eure, a prominent figure, was a member of the original Carbonari founded back in 1820.
Okay.
Along with him, other members listed like Arago, Lamartine, Ledru-Rollin, Garnier-Paget, Marie, and Adolphe Crémieux, who we'll talk more about later, are presented in this context. It's shown as evidence of these revolutionary and secret networks penetrating the highest levels of power right after a major upheaval, reinforcing the source's theme of hidden influence driving events.
That's a direct claim of secret society members taking power. It definitely reinforces the source's theme of hidden influence deeply embedded in historical events, suggesting these weren't just fringe groups, but forces capable of seizing control in crises.
Precisely. It paints a picture where revolutions aren't always spontaneous popular uprisings.
Okay, so we've looked at political secret societies, some revolutionary, some counter-revolutionary, operating overtly but with hidden structures. Now let's dive into the groups described in these sources that have a more explicitly Masonic, occult, or esoteric foundation, and how they might connect to this wider network. The source material spends a lot of time on these.
It does. It mentions the Scottish philosophic Rite, just naming it as one of the main divisions of Freemasonry.
Okay, just setting the stage.
Exactly. It's presented as part of the broader, sometimes fragmented Masonic landscape from which other esoteric groups emerged or drew influence, suggesting a shared pool of symbols, rituals, maybe concepts.
And the modern Knights Templar, they seem to pop up in different countries in the sources.
Suggests an international aspect even for these more esoteric orders.
Yes, the sources discuss them in England, France, and Sweden, highlighting distinct national versions of this revived Templarism. The English branch is noted as founded in 1804.
Right.
But even before that formal founding, by 1791, the Templar Rite in England is described with this elaborate title, Grand Elect Knights Templar Kadosh of St. John of Jerusalem, Palestine, Rhodes, and Malta, explicitly combining modern elements with degrees presented as more ancient, rooted in historical orders.
And there's a claim in the source about their historical legitimacy, linking back to the original medieval Templars.
Yes, the source discusses the attempt to create that historical continuity. It claims that the famous list of supposed Grand Masters of the Temple since Jacques de Molay was executed in 1314, while it was actually a fabrication.
A fake cool, who supposedly made it.
It attributes this forgery to a Jesuit father named Bonani, who is described rather dismissively as a learned rogue. This document, supposedly designed to connect the new order to the original Templars across the centuries, is said to have been created with features meant to mimic authenticity, calculated to fool even experts in ancient writing.
So, the source alleges a deliberate invention of history and lineage, just to legitimize this modern esoteric order, by falsely connecting it to a powerful historical, military, and religious group.
That's the explicit claim about the Lerminius list, which is often cited by modern Templar groups. Now, the Swedish Templars, mentioned separately, they assert a totally different origin story,
Oh,
claiming Templary was introduced there much earlier by a nephew of de Molay via the Order of Christ in Portugal, a different lineage claim entirely. The source presents both without really validating either, showing these competing historical narratives within the traditions themselves.
interesting. The sources also mention the Rite of Mizraim in Memphis. Sounds very Egyptian.
They are discussed. The sources note their amalgamation, their merging, back in 1775. This process was reportedly facilitated by John Yarker.
Ah, Yarker. He seems to pop up a lot in these sources, connecting different groups.
He does. He appears repeatedly as someone linking various esoteric and Masonic currents. It's noted that the Rite of Mizraim specifically had no separate governing body in England, which the source implies is why this amalgamation, creating a combined rite, happened there.
Okay.
An official statement, mentioned as appearing in Neff identified as the Order's journal, claimed that France had abandoned the Rite. And when J.E. Marconis, a big figure in the Rite, died in 1868, Egypt reportedly took full control of its central authority.
And John Yarker seems to be a key connector across several different esoteric organizations based on this material.
He really does appear central to the source's map of this network, suggesting he was pivotal in bringing together and transmitting various esoteric and Masonic currents, especially those with a more occult or Egyptian flavor, according to these sources.
Another Masonic body mentioned is the Cernau Rite, presented as a branch of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite.
Yes. Joseph Cernau is noted as showing up in New York in 1806. He reportedly arrived with a patent for Scottish Rite degrees from a Mathieu Dupotet. He then called a grand consistory in 1808, claiming jurisdiction over 25 degrees of the Scottish Rite.
But there was controversy.
Oh, yes. A controversy soon blew up with established groups tied to the Supreme Council at Charleston, South Carolina. They operated the now more standard 33-degree version of the Rite.
A degrees war.
Essentially. The account notes the difficulty Cernau faced trying to maintain a 25-degree Rite against a movement standardizing around 33 degrees, suggesting a conflict over authority, legitimacy, and maybe the perceived completeness of their system within American Masonry.
So internal disputes and power struggles within the Masonic world itself are also highlighted here. What about the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia? It's very English, focused on Rosicrucianism.
It was. Founded in 1866 by Robert Wentworth Little. The source identifies him as an eminent Freemason. Little held important positions in mainstream Masonry, like Secretary of the Province of Middlesex, Secretary of the Royal Masonic Institution for Girls, positions that likely gave him access and influence.
Right.
He became the first Supreme Magus, the head, basically, and Master General of their college in 1867.
Where did he get the knowledge or authority to start a Rosicrucian society, according to the sources?
The sources state his knowledge and authority came from two main places. First, from certain Rosicrucian papers that had been kept safe by Brother William Henry White, the Grand Secretary of the United Grand Lodge of England.
Okay.
Apparently, these papers came into White's possession years earlier, but he hadn't done anything with them. Little reportedly found and used them. Second, from knowledge and authority belonging to Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie, an esotericist who had made German contacts during an earlier stay there.
So a mix of old, maybe dormant English esoteric documents and connections to European, specifically German esoteric currents. How was this society structured, according to the source?
According to the source, the society, supposedly following ancient tradition, had 9 classes or grades, a common structure in these orders.
Right, the 9 levels.
And the number of members allowed in each class was restricted, suggesting a hierarchy with limited entry to higher levels. For example, the source specifies the first 4 grades combined had a total membership cap of just 99 members.
Pretty exclusive.
Seems so. And to reach higher offices within the society, you needed to attain at least the 3rd order or be recognized as an ancient.
Clearly indicating a selective hierarchical structure, limited membership at higher levels, implying, increasing access to knowledge or influence as you go up. Moving into more explicitly occult or spiritual territory, the Hermetic Society is mentioned.
The Hermetic Society. Founded in London 1884 by Anna Kingsford and Edward Maitland, Both of them are noted as having been members of the Theosophical Society.
Ah, an overlap there.
Definitely indicates an overlap between these esoteric movements. The source describes the Hermetic Society as advocating a kind of Gnostic mix of Christianity and Buddhism, a synthesis of East and West esoteric traditions.
And their view on figures like Christ seems focused on human potential.
Yes. The sources note that for Anna Kingsford, much like for Madame Blavatsky, the Christs are beings who have succeeded in developing in themselves certain superior powers latent in all men.
So, not unique divine figures, but perfected humans.
That's the interpretation, framing figures like Christ as examples of perfected human potential. This idea is possibly linked, according to the source, to concepts like serpent power or kundalini.
Kundalini.
Yes, which it specifically relates to the sex force, suggesting a connection between spiritual or even superhuman attainment and the sublimation or manipulation of sexual energy.
Linking spiritual attainment to esoteric concepts like kundalini and the sex force, that definitely adds another potentially controversial layer to their teachings as described here. This thread of overlapping membership and shared concepts seems to lead us naturally to the Order of the Golden Dawn.
Ah, yes, the Golden Dawn, the Order of the Golden Dawn in the Outer. A very influential group in late 19th, early 20th century Western esotericism. It's noted as having origins related to the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, according to these sources.
Okay, another connection.
Founded in the late 19th century, leaders like William Wynne Westcott and Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers were prominent figures.
And there was a big internal conflict or split early on.
Yes, the source mentions a notable split around 1903. This led to splinter groups forming. One was Stella Matutina, associated with figures like the infamous Aleister Crowley and initially also William Wynne Westcott.
Crowley, right.
The other faction, often keeping the Golden Dawn name or similar, was led by Arthur Edward Waite and MacGregor Mathers. Mathers is described as a friend of Rudolf Steiner, linking this group to other esoteric networks on the continent.
Interesting.
The sources note that the Golden Dawn faction later merged back with Stella Matutina in 1912, suggesting a kind of reconsolidation.
Stella Matutina also sounds like it had some interesting features, maybe harsh requirements.
It was founded in 1903, and notably, unlike some older Masonic bodies, it admitted both men and women.
Okay.
Dr. Robert Felkin was appointed head of Stella Matutina by Rudolf Steiner in 1912, another example of cross-pollination between these groups.
Leitner again.
Yes. Now, the source quotes from a book it attributes to someone called Inquire Within, titled Light Bearers of Darkness. It claims to detail the initiation oath of Stella Matutina. It includes a pretty chilling, frankly terrifying threat for breaking secrecy. It says something like, "If thou shalt fail of this, thy oath of secrecy, thy blood may be poured out and thy body broken." The quote is cut off in the source provided, but the implication of severe physical harm, maybe even death, for revealing secrets is crystal clear.
Wow. That's an extremely severe penalty described in the source.
That's
really underscores the seriousness and potential danger attributed to these oaths, suggesting a demand for absolute loyalty backed by terrifying consequences. Now, perhaps the most controversial and intensely described group in this material, which the source seems to position as a kind of central hub, modern Illuminism, or the Ordo Templi Orientis, the O.T.O.
Yes, the sources present the O.T.O, or Ancient Order of Oriental Templars, as a key component of what it calls modern Illuminism. It states the O.T.O was founded by Karl Kellner in 1895.
Okay.
When Kellner died in 1905, he was succeeded as head by Theodore Reuss. Reuss is explicitly identified in the source as an agent of John Yarker.
Yarker again, the same guy from the Mizraim and Memphis rites, reinforces that idea of overlapping networks.
Absolutely. And there are more connections to the groups we've already mentioned, particularly the Rosicrucian or esoteric ones.
Definitely. The sources state that in 1902, Reuss appointed William Wynne Westcott, who was also involved in the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, and had connections to German Illuminism as regent of the Illuminati in England.
Okay.
The source views this as deliberately setting up interlocking directorates between the Fondsmuck Rose in Anglia and German Illuminism via the O.T.O leadership, suggesting a conscious effort to unify or coordinate the leadership of these various esoteric bodies.
What does O.T.O stand for? And is there a deeper, maybe hidden meaning described in the source?
O.T.O officially stands for Ordo Templi Orientis, Order of the Temple of the Orient. However, the sources quote from the Equinox, a publication linked to the O.T.O, edited by Aleister Crowley. It states explicitly that the letters O.T.O have also a secret meaning for initiates.
But it doesn't say what that secret meaning is.
Not outright. But the sources speculate, borrowing from Godfrey Higgins's work on ancient religions about penetrating the sanctum sanctorum of the ancient philosophers of India, Iran, and Chaldea, and explicitly link this concept to the phallus.
Ah, so suggesting a focus on sexual or generative symbolism as the core secret at its highest levels, tied to ancient wisdom traditions.
That interpretation is very heavily presented in this section of the source, and the sources make a really strong claim about the O.T.O, saying it concentrates the wisdom and knowledge of numerous other bodies.
Which ones?
The appendix, detailed in the source material, lists loads. The Gnostic Catholic Church, the Illuminati, various Knights Templar orders, numerous Masonic rites specifically mentioning the 33rd, 97th, and 90th degrees, representing different systems like Scottish Rite and Memphis Mizraim, the Theosophical Society, Marnionists, the Setbai, and many other orders of equal merit, if of less fame.
That's a huge claim that the O.T.O somehow consolidates or holds the core knowledge of all these diverse, secret, and esoteric groups, positioning itself as a synthesis.
Exactly. What's the stated goal of this concentration, according to the source?
According to the sources, the aim of bringing together the knowledge of these different groups is to recombine and centralize their activities, even as white light divided in a prism may be recomposed, suggesting a deliberate, synthetic effort to gather dispersed secret wisdom traditions under one ultimate banner and leadership.
And the source makes a very controversial, even shocking claim about the O.T.O's ultimate purpose or aim, as supposedly revealed in its highest levels.
Yes, they do. Based on notes the source attributes to Theodore Rees and correspondence with Karl Kellner, the sources state that the O.T.O was formed for the express purpose of substituting the phallic religion for Christianity.
Wow. Substituting a phallic religion for Christianity? That's presented as a fundamental transformative aim of the O.T.O. Now, this is where the sources contain some of the most disturbing descriptions, particularly about sacrifice rituals.
They do, and this section is presented with graphic detail. The sources quote directly from the Master Therian's publication Magic, published in 1930, describing the killing of animals within the magical circle or triangle during ceremonies.
Why? What's the purpose described?
The purpose, as described, is to make sure their energy can't escape, but is captured within the ritual space. It specifies choosing an animal whose nature matches the ceremony, like a ram for evoking Mars energy.
Okay. And then there is the deeply sensitive and highly controversial claim about human sacrifice for the highest spiritual working.
Yes. The source quotes Magic directly and extensively here. It states, and I'm quoting exactly from the source material provided, "For the highest spiritual working, one must accordingly choose that victim which contains the greatest and purest force. A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable victim."
That's incredibly shocking.
It continues quoting the text about using blood in the magical triangle and states, "But the bloody sacrifice, though more dangerous, is more efficacious, and for nearly all purposes, human sacrifice is the best." The quote finishes by mentioning the possibility of using one's own blood or a disciple's without sacrificing the physical life irrevocably, implying symbolic or partial sacrifice might also be used.
That is an extraordinarily shocking claim presented in the source material, alleging the theoretical justification for human sacrifice, specifically of innocent children, within this tradition for achieving the highest spiritual working. It's absolutely crucial for you listening to understand that this is what this source presents as being described within O.T.O doctrines at its highest levels, quoting a specific text it attributes to a key figure. We are reporting precisely what is stated in this material you provided.
Absolutely. This is quoted directly from the material, presented as part of the O.T.O's claimed practices or beliefs at its highest levels of initiation. The sources also touch upon the moral code presented within these circles, quoting Eliphas Levi, a French occultist who in turn quotes from the Upanishad, described as an Indian magic book.
And what does that code permit, according to the quote?
The quoted part of the code is quite specific and, well, pragmatic in a disturbing way. It is permissible to lie in order to facilitate marriage, and in order to exalt the virtues of a Brahmin or the qualities of a doll. The sentence trails off in the quote provided in the source material.
Lying is permissible under certain conditions, like facilitating marriage or exalting certain individuals. Another striking detail from the source's view of these groups' ethics suggests a kind of utilitarian approach to truth.
It does. How does the O.T.O attract members, according to this material, given these extreme potential doctrines?
The sources claim the O.T.O plays on egoistical instincts, ambition, and the limited capacity of individuals. It's described as attracting those who, with inordinate ambition and limited capacity, hope to save humanity or achieve personal power through glorification of self, often by promising material success or hidden knowledge.
And the source makes a very strong assertion about the O.T.O's position relative to other esoteric or secret groups it has discussed.
It asserts that the head of the O.T.O is justified in saying that this order reigns above all others, implying a position of ultimate authority or knowledge within this network. It claims that everything from political espionage to blackmail may emanate from it, suggesting it's a center for manipulation and potentially illicit activities.
Wow.
It also mentions what it calls profess houses, citing examples like the Abode of Love, the House of Rest, or Gorgiev's establishment, likely referring to G.I. Gurdjieff. It alleges scandalous happenings take place there, but remain undisturbed, despite sometimes being reported in the press.
Those are serious allegations of deep power and influence, suggesting questionable activities happening without legal consequence, as described in the source. What's required of people joining the O.T.O at some level, according to this material?
The sources state that aspirants must acquiesce in complete subordination of their will to that of unknown chiefs, suggests a structure of absolute obedience, surrendering personal will to hidden higher-level leaders. The degrees of the O.T.O are also described, ranging from 0 degrees to X degrees, with the 8 degrees, X degrees, X degrees, and O.H.O, outer head of the order, being presented as the most advanced and secret, where presumably these ultimate doctrines and practices are revealed.
Okay. Shifting slightly, the source also discusses Co-Masonry, which brings in both men and women.
Co-Masonry, yes. Also known as Universal Co-Freemasonry, discussed as founded in France in 1893 as a mixed lodge, admitting men and women equally, which was revolutionary for traditional Freemasonry then.
And it spread.
Later spread to other countries like India and England. The sources note that in this system, the craft lodges, the basic 3 degrees, might be under the control of the Supreme Council of the highest degree of the Rite, indicating a centralized authority structure.
And the initiation process for Co-Masonry is described in some detail, particularly how the candidate is prepared.
Yes, the preparation for the apprentice degree is detailed. It draws parallels to traditional Masonic initiation, but adds specific elements. The candidate is stripped of medals and valuables, blindfolded, has their right arm, left breast, and left knee bared, right heel slipshod. Those are pretty common preparatory elements.
Right.
Then, however, they are described as being saturated with magnetic fluid.
Saturated with magnetic fluid. What's the implication of that phrase here, according to the source?
The source links this specifically to potential dangers in the occult. It mentions a warning given to initiates about potential dangers and misapplication of this magnetic fluid by a healer, calling it a real danger known to occultists. It explicitly links the practice to hypnotism.
So suggesting the initiation involves practices the source associates with occult energy manipulation, psychic influence, maybe even a form of hypnotic susceptibility that could potentially be used for control.
That seems to be the implication presented. This theme of potential manipulation or control through esoteric or energetic means keeps recurring across different groups described in these sources. Speaking of which, the Theosophical Society is heavily detailed, often presented as a major player in the esoteric world.
The Theosophical Society gets considerable attention, yes. Founded 1875 by Madame H.P. Blavatsky and Colonel H.S. Olcott. Blavatsky is described as having studied Lamaism in the Himalayas and was apparently received with honor in England way back in 1830, long before the society was founded. The Brahmo Samaj in India, a theistic movement from 1830, was mentioned earlier in the source connecting to figures involved with theosophy. It got an impulse from Debendra Nath Tagore, who joined in 1842. His disregard for rules on Hindu marriages later caused a split after Keshub Chandra Sen, another figure from that movement, visited England in 1870.
Blavatsky seems to have connected with spiritualist circles in England and got significant interest for her ideas about Eastern spirituality.
Yes, the source notes Keshub Chandra Sen's 1870 trip to England resulted in him being enthusiastically welcomed by spiritualist centers. This excited considerable public interest in India's political, social, and religious affairs, which sort of created fertile ground for theosophy.
Okay.
Blavatsky and Olcott themselves left for India in 1878 and founded the main Theosophical Center in Adyar, near Madras, in 1882. It was there, according to the source, that Blavatsky started her esoteric section and claimed contact with hidden spiritual masters she called the Mahatmas, specifically Maurya and Kuthumi.
These Mahatmas, they're described as pretty powerful figures, almost controllers of the world, according to Theosophy.
That's the claim presented by the source. It states these Mahatmas are members of the highest degree of the Great White Lodge, which, according to the Theosophists, secretly governs the world.
Wow. Secret world government.
However, the source also notes that Blavatsky's claims of fantastic phenomena, like receiving precipitated letters from the Mahatmas and materializations, were suspected of being fraudulent. They were reportedly exposed by the Society for Psychical Research in 1885.
So, a society claiming contact with hidden world rulers and having amazing spiritual powers, but facing accusations of deliberate deception.
That's the duality presented in the sources regarding theosophy. It quotes the Theosophist, the Society's own publication, stating explicitly the Society's claim to be a world government as they were recognized in ancient days, the place they have ever continued to occupy. A direct claim to a role of global governance, albeit presented as a spiritual or occult form inherited from ancient wisdom.
And it was linked to various other bodies, forming a web of associated organizations.
Yes, the source includes info from a letter dated 1926 listing numerous associated bodies under the Theosophical umbrella or closely linked. These include the Theosophical Educational Trust, the Theosophical World University, the Order of the Star in the East.
That was the one preparing for the world teacher, right?
Krishnamurti. Exactly. Though he later dissolved the order. Also listed are the Liberal Catholic Church, a syncretic religious body with Catholic-like ritual but theosophical doctrine, and the Order of Universal Co-Freemasonry.
Co-Masonry again.
Blavatsky herself moved back to London in 1887, started the magazine Lucifer, and published major works like Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled. The sources also note friendly relations with Rosicrucian societies, citing a letter from MacGregor Mathers of the Golden Dawn, and mentions connections between key figures like Pappas, a French occultist, Blavatsky, Mathers, and Rius.
Rius from the O.T.O.
The very same, reinforcing the idea of these being interconnected, overlapping networks.
This definitely reinforces that picture of different esoteric paths, having overlapping members, shared leaders, friendly relations, as depicted here. Another offshoot specifically mentions the Anthroposophical Society.
Founded in 1913 by Rudolf Steiner, explicitly described in the sources as an offshoot of the Theosophical Society, representing Steiner's divergence from Annie Besant's leadership after Blavatsky died.
Okay.
Edward Schur, author of the influential book The Great Initiates, is noted as having initially followed Steiner after leaving Besant's theosophy, although he later reportedly went back to his earlier theosophical affiliation.
Were there connections between Steiner and other German secret societies, further illustrating these networks?
Yes. Steiner is noted as being a friend of Dr. Hugo Schleiden. Schleiden held significant positions, Secretary General of the German Theosophical Society and, importantly, also president of several German secret societies listed in the source.
Which ones?
Including the Druiden-Norden, the Black Templars, various Rosicrucian groups, and Yggdrasil, likely a Germanic neo-pagan or esoteric group. This connection positions Steiner, and by extension anthroposophy, within a broader network of German esoteric and secret societies, according to this source.
And the Druiden-Norden mentioned there is connected elsewhere in the sources too, suggesting political links.
It is. It's discussed in connection with the International League for Peace and Freedom, a seemingly benevolent organization.
What?
But the sources describe this league as being the concrete expression of the Eastern school of German monarchists. These monarchists, according to the source, believed in coming to an understanding with Soviet Russia.
Why?
The source suggests two potential aims for this understanding. Either for a war of revenge against the Allied powers that defeated Germany in World War I, or, failing that, for undermining the Allies through revolutionary propaganda, particularly aimed throughout the British Empire.
So, connecting occult and Masonic-leaning groups like the Druiden-Norden to explicit political aims, international strategy, even revolutionary propaganda, according to this source. It's painting a complex picture of overlapping influence and potential manipulation across different spheres.
A very complex picture indeed, where the lines between esoteric pursuits and political action become quite blurred.
Okay, moving beyond the esoteric and Masonic, these sources also detail societies with explicitly political aims, often with an international reach. These groups operate more in the public or semi-public sphere, but are presented here as having underlying connections or secret motivations, fitting into that larger narrative of hidden influence.
Yes, they discuss early associations that had a big impact on revolutionary thought, like the International Society of Democracy, also referred to in the source as the Communist League of Workers.
Early Marx involvement here.
Yes, noted as an early influential association involving figures like Karl Marx and Franz Heinrich Benedict Venedig. It eventually transitioned into a more open, organized movement.
And Venedi's role seems notable in connecting this early group to later political events.
According to the source, after the February Revolution in France in 1848, Venedig returned to Germany, still with Karl Marx. The source states Venedig soon became one of the key chiefs of the Revolutionary Committee of 50, a provisional parliament set up in Frankfurt during the German revolutions of 1848-49.
So placing Marx himself right at the heart of these early, explicitly revolutionary international groups, influencing political upheaval in Germany, as described here.
That's the connection made. Then there's the Alliance Israelite Universelle, the AIU, a prominent international organization focused on Jewish affairs.
Yes, I've heard of them. Founded mid-19th century.
Officially founded 1860 in Paris, though the sources claim it existed in some form for centuries before that. Its formal development is specifically linked to the aftermath of the Damascus Affair in 1840.
The Damascus Affair.
An event where accusations of ritual murder were made against Jews, leading to arrests and persecution, a major international incident at the time.
And a key figure strongly associated with the AIU in these sources, who also connects to other groups we've discussed, is Adolphe Cremieux.
Cremieux is presented as a central, highly influential figure in this section. The source looks at his life from three angles it sees as interconnected. His activities related to what the source calls his racial Jewish identity, his extensive Masonic activities, and his significant political influence. He reportedly took a prominent part in the Damascus Affair, alongside Moses Montefiore, advocating for the accused Jews.
And his Masonic involvement is presented as quite extensive.
The sources state he was a member of the Supreme Council of the Order of Mizraim, one of those esoteric rites we mentioned. He's also noted as becoming Grand Master of both the Grand Orient de France and the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite in France after the previous head died.
Head of both major French bodies. That suggests considerable influence in those circles.
Definitely. Politically, he seems to have had a complex and long path through various French regimes.
How so?
Admired Napoleon I in his youth. Later became a close friend and legal advisor to the Bonaparte family, even while, according to the source, mingling with Napoleon III's political enemies, including Maurice Joly.
Joly, the author of that dialogue between Machiavelli and Montesquieu book, the source sees as significant.
The very same. After Napoleon III fell and the Third Republic was established in 1871, Cremieux is described as taking an open and prominent role in French politics, serving in government.
And the source attributes significant influence to him in the anti-religious campaigns that were happening in France then.
It states that from 1871 until his death, Cremieux, wearing both his hat as president of the Alliance Israelite Universelle and Grand Master of the Scottish Rite, exercised a tremendous influence upon the anti-religious campaign in France. This campaign aimed to reduce the power of the Catholic Church and religion in public life.
Okay.
The source then makes a very strong and obviously controversial claim about his motivations. It alleges that in all his lifelong activities, he was only obeying the teachings of the Talmud and trying to destroy every religion but that contained in Judaism.
Now, that is a very strong and deeply controversial claim made by the source about his motivations and aims, linking his political actions directly to a specific, and in the source's view, antagonistic religious directive from the Talmud. Again, we must stress we are reporting here precisely what the source material claims, attributing this motivation directly to the source's interpretation.
It is a highly charged interpretation presented by the source, yes. To support its view of the AIU's broader aims, the source says, quote, his speech at a General Assembly of the AIU in Paris in May 1864.
What did he say?
The alliance is not limited to our cult. It voices its appeal to all cults and wants to penetrate in all the religions as it has penetrated into all countries. Let us endeavor boldly to bring about the union of all cults under one flag of union and progress.
Union of all cults under one flag of union and progress. Sounds like a move towards a universal religion or structure, and the sources explicitly compared this statement to other controversial texts.
Yes, the source immediately follows this quote with a pointed rhetorical question. Are the protocols of the wise men of Zion or the speeches of Machiavelli in Joly's book not illustrated here? This comparison is made by the source itself, directly linking Cernau's stated aims for the AIU to the themes of manipulative world domination and hidden power found in the Protocols and Jolly's satire.
And what does the source material conclude are the ultimate aims of the AIU, based on its analysis?
The sources unequivocally state their belief, derived from their interpretation of the AIU's activities and statements like Cernau's, that the AIU's aims, namely a super government of the world and a universal religion, both to be Judaic, are being steadily pursued by the Jewish World Agency functioning today.
That is a highly charged, explicitly ethno-religious, and deeply controversial claim presented directly within this source material, alleging a global Jewish super government and universal Judaic religion as the active goal of the AIU, which the source identifies as a Jewish World Agency. We are reporting here precisely what the source material claims, and its controversial nature as presented by the source.
Precisely. Moving on, the sources give considerable attention to the international, both the first and second iterations, placing them within this network of political influence. Karl Marx's early involvement is again highlighted as foundational.
How is that described in his early career?
In his early days in Paris, the sources note Marx edited a paper called Annales Franco-Allemandes. This is described as the organ of a secret society founded by Arnold Riege, who's presented as a disciple of the Italian revolutionary Mazzini.
Mazzini again.
Yes. The source then traces the roots of the First International, noting the first attempt at such a society was by German workmen expelled from France in 1839, including members from various countries.
And the International Workingmen's Association, the First International as was usually called it, was formally reorganized later.
Yes, formally reorganized in London in 1864. A key moment was adopting a report drafted by Karl Marx, effectively setting the movement's agenda. The sources quote, "What they present as the movement's core aim from this period: expropriation of all existing proprietors by the abolition of the political and legal state, by the force of events and circumstances."
Expropriation and abolition of the state. Pretty radical revolutionary objective.
Definitely. Targeting both property and the state itself. And it seems this movement, despite being political, found a physical headquarters with a rather suggestive name, according to the source.
Oh, what was that?
The sources state that after showing its strength and growing influence, the International was deemed deserving of better quarters. A building near Geneva was found, which the sources specifically identify as the Masonic Temple, Temple Unique.
Masonic Temple, Temple Unique for the International.
That's what the source claims. It points out they even put the word temple on their cards and bills, suggesting that their political cult had gained a worthy shrine, implicitly linking their revolutionary political movement to structures and terminology usually associated with Freemasonry.
That's a really interesting detail noted in the source. An explicitly political revolutionary group, using Masonic Temple and Temple Unique for their HQ, reinforces that theme of overlapping influences.
It is, and the source highlights it to suggest a connection beyond just coincidence. The source describes the growing power shown by strikes organized by the International and the eventual uniting of what it calls the bourgeois demagogues and the workmen demagogues within the movement.
Okay.
After the Paris Commune was suppressed in 1871, sections of the International across Europe reportedly approved of its violent actions. The Zurich Declaration, mentioned in the source, is quoted declaring that the struggle maintained by the Commune of Paris was just and worthy.
And Marx's connection continued until the organization eventually dissolved.
Yes. In 1872, according to the source, Karl Marx transferred the seat of the General Council of the International from Europe to New York, placed it in care of his faithful follower, F.A. Sorge, whom the source describes as his co-religionist.
And what happened in New York?
There, the organization is said by the sources to have degenerated into purely anarchist revolutionaries and was eventually dissolved in 1876.
But the idea of an international socialist or communist movement didn't just die out.
No, efforts were made to recreate it. This led to the founding of the Second International in 1889. Its development was initially slowed by arguments between different socialist factions, but a program of unification was reportedly adopted in Amsterdam in 1905.
Right.
A structured voting system was set up in 1907, giving 20 votes each to the leading nations, reflecting National Party strength. A permanent bureau was established in Brussels with Emile van der Velde as chairman. In England, a special joint committee was formed to coordinate, and British votes were split among various groups, including the Labour Party, the Independent Labour Party, ILP, the British Socialist Party, and the Fabian Society.
The Fabian Society, another group given considerable attention in the source material. often presented as a key player in a more, well, gradualist approach to achieving socialist aims.
The Fabian Society, yes. Founded in England around 1883 or 1884, its stated aim, as described in the source, wasn't violent revolution, but a more subtle, pervasive strategy to inoculate public opinion and permeate existing organizations and political parties with socialism.
Inoculate public opinion. That's an interesting phrase. Who are some of the key early members mentioned? The source lists quite a few prominent names.
It does list prominent figures who were early Fabians, many becoming very influential in British public life. Sidney Olivier, Hubert Bland, R.B. Haldane, later Lord Haldane, George Bernard Shaw, Sidney Webb, later Lord Passfield, and his wife Beatrice, Graham Wallis, William Clark, noted specifically as a former disciple of Mazzini.
Mazzini again?
Yes, Mrs. Annie Besant.
The Theosophist.
The very same. Dr. Pankhurst, likely Richard Pankhurst, Emmeline's husband, and Mrs. Charlotte M. Wilson. A lot of well-known names.
And its relationship with the International Socialist Bureau, connecting it to the broader international movement.
It had formal representation, holding 2 votes in the International Socialist Bureau. The source also highlights a very close relationship with the Independent Labour Party, the ILP, a significant left-wing party.
How close?
It states that half of 2/3 of Fabians also belong to the ILP and claims nearly all ILP leaders were or had been Fabians. Suggests a strong cross-pollination of leadership and ideas between the more intellectual Fabian society and a key political party.
The source attributes a rather dramatic and almost ominous belief to the Fabians regarding their influence and ultimate goals.
It claims the Fabians believe they administer forces that operate international destruction.
The international destruction, that's strong.
Very strong. The sources link their gradualist strategy explicitly to earlier revolutionaries like Babeuf and Buonarroti, followers of Gracchus Babeuf, the 18th century French revolutionary, calling it the methodology of revolutionary socialism, just applied more subtly.
No.
Their methods are described as using numerous detached societies, committees, study clubs, associations, leagues, schools, a diffuse network for spreading ideas and influencing various sectors.
International destruction. How is this destruction supposedly carried out, according to the source, through these gradualist methods?
One of their main ideals, as presented and interpreted by the source, is the extinction of the poor. Maybe not literally, but perhaps the existing class structure or conditions. The source identifies specific tools for this destruction, citing income tax and inheritance tax laws as the best known and cleverest destructionist laws.
Tax laws as destructionists.
It argues these laws are calculated eventually to precipitate municipalization and nationalization, transferring ownership of industries and services to local or national government. This process, the source claims, is part of a larger, deliberate scheme for world perfection, but achieved gradually through legislation and policy.
And this gradualist, seemingly bureaucratic strategy is linked, in the source, to other movements we've discussed, including more explicitly revolutionary or esoteric ones.
Yes, the source makes explicit, highly controversial links. It connects this gradualist Fabian strategy to what it calls Judeo-Masonic Russian-Soviet communism, and states that it embodies the principles of Weishaupt's Illuminati: destruction, materialism, and imposition. The source even claims that conservative governments in Britain handle tax policy similarly to Labour or liberal governments, implying Fabian influence has permeated the entire political spectrum and that questioning Fabian policy is considered political suicide within the establishment.
So the source is presenting the Fabian Society not just as a socialist think tank, but as a secretive, powerful force working towards a form of global destruction of the old order and imposing a new one, using seemingly mundane means like tax law, influencing mainstream politics, and linking it all back to Illuminati principles and a controversial mix of other movements. That's a significant and highly contentious set of claims made by the source.
It is, painting a picture of hidden ideological warfare waged through policy. The source suggests, somewhat satirically, maybe an international organization of taxpayers could be a potential counter-revolutionary body against this perceived Fabian Babeufism, linking modern Fabians to those earlier, more violent Babeufist methods.
Okay, moving on. The Narodna Odbrana is discussed, particularly in the lead-up to World War I.
This was a Serbian organization.
Yes, described as a Serbian patriotic organization founded in 1911 by Dr. Karl Krammarsch, presented as the organizer of the Pan-Slavic movement.
And the source makes a strong direct connection to Freemasonry regarding its leadership, even linking it to the Archduke's assassination.
It does. It claims the leading personalities of the Radna Brana were Freemasons, stating this was clearly demonstrated at the trial for high treason of the bomb thrower Kabrinovich, one of Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassins.
And this connection is then used to directly implicate Masonic lodges in the assassination itself.
The sources quote the British Observer newspaper from June 1917 during the war. This paper claimed that it cannot be doubted that the international lodges, Scottish Rite, must take the full responsibility for the uprising en masse of the brethren in the lodges, and for the political propaganda against Germany. Crucially, it explicitly adds, and specifically for the murder of the Archduke, which was organized in the lodges.
Wow, that is a direct accusation from a contemporary source, quoted here. Claiming specific Masonic lodges, particularly Scottish Rite, organized the assassination that triggered World War I. That's a remarkable and controversial historical claim presented in this material.
The sources also quote La Revue Internationale des Sociétés Secrètes, the International Review of Secret Societies, a journal from 1912, 2 years before the assassination. It mentions a remark reportedly made by a Swiss individual about the Archduke. He is all right. It is a pity that he has been condemned. He will die on the steps of the throne.
Condemned before it happened.
This premonition, combined with the later accusation in the British Observer, is presented by the source as chilling evidence linked to these secret networks and their alleged foreknowledge or involvement.
That's a powerful claim, linking secret society activity directly to the outbreak of the most devastating war the world had seen then. Shifting across the Atlantic, in America, the Friends of Irish Freedom are mentioned.
This society is presented as founded in 1915 by figures like Judge Cohalan and T. St. John Gaffney, specifically under the wing of the Clan na Gael, a prominent Irish-American group supporting Irish independence.
Okay.
The source notes that Gaffney was appointed as the representative of the Irish Republic in Berlin during World War I, suggesting potential links between Irish nationalist groups in America and Germany, both enemies of Britain at the time.
Makes sense strategically. And finally, in this section on political movements, the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, is discussed in the sources, focusing on its revival in 1915.
The KKK is described as being refounded in 1915 by William Joseph Simmons in Georgia. The sources detail its corporate structure, power for the central body to issue decrees to subordinate branches in the U.S. and elsewhere. Also notes the central organization's right to control sales of all KKK paraphernalia, regalia, stationery, jewelry, suggesting a centralized and commercialized structure.
Right.
Simmons reportedly held his top position for life and personally chose the executive committee.
What were the stated objectives of this new version of the KKK, according to the source?
The sources quote, the objectives listed by the organization itself included cultivating patriotism, honorable clannishness, practical benevolence, shielding home sanctity and womanhood chastity, and a central objective, forever maintain white supremacy. Also listed as teaching spiritual philosophy via ritualism and conserving American institutions' ideals.
Forever maintain white supremacy. Pretty unambiguous. And the membership qualifications listed were quite specific, defining who could join.
Yes, the source quotes them directly, highlighting the exclusion. Applicant had to be a white male Gentile, native-born U.S. citizen, owing allegiance to no foreign government, institution, sect, ruler, person, or people. Also, 18-plus run, sound mind, good character, respectable reputation, vocation, exemplary habits.
Very specific criteria. The source then discusses the growth of this revived clan and the reaction it caused, particularly focusing on ethnic and religious tensions.
It notes the KKK's rapid growth caused significant unease, particularly for what the source terms Jewish power, because it constituted, in the source's words, an imperium in imperio, within American society, a state within a state.
An empire within an empire.
It's described as representing a Christian empire sound and free that, according to the source, refused to adhere to three tenets the source attributes to this Jewish power: the mongrelization of race, anti-Christianity, and internationalism.
This is another instance of the source presenting highly controversial and specific claims about power dynamics and alleged ideological conflicts between different ethnic and religious groups in America.
It is. And again, we are strictly relaying what the source material claims, not validating or endorsing these views ourselves. The source notes a change in the immigrant population arriving in America, mentioning ghettos of Poland, Russia, the Balkan states, and Germany, and states American ideals meant nothing to them. It even notes, as an indicator of native sentiment, that New York was commonly being called Jew York by native Gentile Americans at the time.
And how does the source describe the reaction and strategy of American Jewry to the rise of the KKK?
The source claims that the American Jewish Kahal, implying a central organizing body being aware of the menace posed by the KKK, took precautions. It states that with great political dexterity, the whole press concurring, the KKK was deliberately and widely portrayed on all sides as the great foe of the Roman Catholic Church.
So the source alleges a deliberate media campaign to redirect animosity.
Yes. It claims this portrayal led Catholics, who were themselves often targets of historical animosity, to see the KKK merely as a branch of their old enemy, Freemasonry, which was historically anti-clerical and often seen as anti-Catholic.
Okay.
The result, according to the source's interpretation, was that the Roman Catholics and the Ku Klux Klan took up the old fight, and the Jews looked on while their two old rivals proceeded to destroy each other. The source concludes this specific point with the cynical Latin phrase, divide et impera, divide and rule, presenting this as a strategic maneuver by one group to cause its perceived adversaries to weaken each other.
That is a remarkable, deeply cynical, and highly controversial narrative presented by the source, alleging the KKK and American Catholics were deliberately manipulated into conflict by a specific group using control over the press, all as an example of a strategic divide and rule tactic. Again, these are the explicit claims made within the source material we're examining, presented as its analysis of these dynamics.
Precisely. The sources are weaving a narrative of complex and often hidden strategic maneuvers between these groups, suggesting power operates through instigating conflict between others.
This brings us to a crucial theme running through these sources, presented as a primary lever of control for some of these groups, the role of international finance and its manipulation.
Absolutely. The sources dedicate significant attention to financial institutions, particularly the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS, founded in 1930 as part of the Hague Agreement and the Young Plan, designed to manage German war reparations after World War I. The sources list its initial international leadership. Gates McGarrah from the U.S. as first chairman, Leon Fraser as deputy, for Charles Addis from Britain, Dr. Hjalmar Schacht and Dr. Melchior from Germany, among others.
And the source quotes a contemporary article from 1930 that takes a very critical view of this new institution.
Yes, it quotes an article by Arthurian in the Referee newspaper in 1930, described the BIS in stark, almost allegorical terms as mammon being enthroned.
Mammon.
Yeah. The quote highlights the bank's unprecedented structure and power, stating it owes allegiance to no single government, and has been given unrestricted powers for 50 years, able to do exactly as it likes to make profits for itself.
Wow. Unrestricted powers for 50 years. And its role in handling war reparations is specifically called out as problematic.
Yes, the source quotes the article stating the BIS controls the machinery of reparations with the seemingly paradoxical ability to squeeze money out of the receivers, like Germany, at a profit to the payers, the Allied powers, implying a system designed for financial gain through the very process of managing international debt. The article quoted then issues a stark warning about the potential consequences of such centralized economic control, describing it as involving the impoverishment, debasement, extinction, and disintegration of all that the masses of this country care for, and predicting the certain decline and fall and redistribution into foreign hands of the British Empire.
That's an incredibly dire prediction linked directly to the establishment and operation of this international financial institution, portraying it as a force for national and imperial destruction.
It is. The source also notes, in this financial context, the alleged suppression of the idea of interest-free credit for wealth production, claiming it's not intended for the masses or societal benefit, but for the enrichment or power of others.
Right.
The conclusion quoted from the same Arthurian article reinforces that theme of global dominance.
Yeah.
It may well be that, through Germany, this section of Wall Street shall dominate the world.
Through Germany. Interesting angle. And the source explicitly compares the described operations and aims of the BIS to that highly controversial document we mentioned earlier, the Protocols.
Yes. It adds a note directly after the BIS discussion. Compare with the Protocols, suggesting the mechanisms of international financial control and potential global dominance described in the quoted article align directly with the alleged plans outlined in the Protocols. Again, this is the source itself drawing this controversial parallel and interpreting the BIS within that framework.
Okay. The sources also discuss racketeering, not just as common crime, but presented as a systematic method of plundering legitimate business, often helped by corruption.
Racketeering is described as a system for plundering legitimate business, often with the connivance of police and officials. The source claims it assumed formidable proportions after Prohibition in the United States, as illegal alcohol trade provided a massive revenue stream for organized crime.
Right, the Prohibition effect.
The sources mention that after Mussolini suppressed the Sicilian Mafia in Italy in 1928, an organization whose members reportedly took an oath to resist law and deceit justice, many members found a fertile field for their activities in the U.S.
And it's presented as highly organized, operating like a business itself.
Yes, described as thoroughly organized in every large American city, structured with various departments specializing in different illicit activities: beer, booze, gambling, vice, and muscling in on industry and labor unions through extortion and intimidation. Explicitly stated to be administered like a great corporation, with the power of gangsters and syndicates increasing dramatically in major U.S. cities by 1931, suggesting it had become a significant economic and social force.
So, organized crime presented not just as criminal activity, but as a structured system of control and plunder, potentially connected to wider networks.
Exactly, a form of predatory organization operating parallel to, and sometimes infiltrating, legitimate structures. Related to this, the sources discuss tax rackets, specifically income and super tax rackets, as another means of exploitation linked to government control.
How are those described? And who's said to be behind them?
They're presented as means of extorting and bleeding taxpayers, implying these tax systems become exploitative, quote, if racketeers gain control of the machinery of government. This situation, the source claims, leads naturally to the extension of fraudulent operators on the stock exchange, as legitimate finance gets tangled with illicit manipulation.
Okay.
The conclusion drawn by the source is quite blunt about who bears the burden. The poor pay the tax. Sometimes the rich pay it, too. In any case, the honest pay for the dishonest. This paints a picture of corruption and exploitation reaching into the fundamental systems of finance and taxation, suggesting manipulation at the highest levels of government and financial institutions, where those in control can use the system for their own benefit at others' expense.
It does. Portraying taxation itself as a potential tool of plunder in the hands of those controlling the government's financial machinery. The sources also raise concerns about the legal system itself, particularly in the USA, suggesting it too might be compromised.
What questions are posed about the justice system? The sources question whether people can always expect to win in court based solely on having a just claim. They raise the possibility that lawyers involved might have opposed interests, serving masters other than their clients, and starkly ask if betrayal must sometimes be paid for in money to ensure a desired outcome, implying a corrupt or compromised legal system where justice isn't guaranteed and might be bought or sold.
Not a very optimistic view of the legal system there.
No. And a social racket is mentioned, giving a specific example to illustrate how these hidden networks might operate outside strictly political or financial spheres, affecting individuals' lives.
What's the example?
The Douglas Tennant case is cited. This was a notable public case involving a lady, Violet Douglas Tennant, dismissed from her position during World War I. The source describes it as having been largely a Masonic intrigue, where Freemasons allegedly conspired to ruin her life and reputation, despite nothing ever being legally proved against her.
A Masonic intrigue.
That's the claim. The sources point out the chairman of the House of Lords Committee trying the case was a noted Freemason, and further claim others connected with the conspiracy against her were also Freemasons.
This brings the theme of secret societies, specifically Freemasonry here, back into the realm of social and legal manipulation. Alleging a conspiracy within that network to target and ruin someone's life and reputation, it reinforces the source's pervasive view of hidden power structures operating in various spheres, from international finance and government to personal reputation and the legal system.
Definitely. Okay, these sources don't just focus on political, financial, or traditional esoteric groups. They also delve into movements with religious, spiritual, or even youth-oriented aims, sometimes presenting them as distinct phenomena, other times explicitly linking them to the other networks, suggesting a diverse range of entry points or fronts for hidden agendas.
Yes, earlier we mentioned the Brahmo Samaj, the theistic movement from India in 1830, noting its connection to figures later involved in theosophy. The sources also discuss the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, founded 1830 by Joseph Smith in New York, presenting a critical account of its origins.
And the description of Joseph Smith's background and the Book of Mormon's origins in the source is quite specific, casting doubt on the official story.
It describes his family negatively: poor, ignorant, thriftless, and not too honest. It recounts his alleged visions, the angel Moroni, showing him where golden plates with ancient scriptures were buried near Manchester, New York, 4 years after the initial vision in 1823, with the plates supposedly delivered by the angel 4 years later in 1827.
Right, the standard story.
But the sources then present an alternative skeptical origin for the Book of Mormon, quoting a claim that it actually originated from a romance story written by a Solomon Spaulding, allegedly copied by Sidney Rigdon and then given to Joseph Smith, who used it as the basis for his scripture.
And Joseph Smith's connection to Freemasonry is noted, linking him to that tradition.
Yes, explicitly stated that Joseph Smith was a Mason, having joined a lodge in Nauvoo, Illinois. The sources also mention a curious instance in 1843 in Kinderhook, Illinois, where some lead plates with strange engravings were found. The source describes this as a gold plate trick being tried again, involving Mormon elders among the spectators, implying it was another attempt to generate ancient artifacts to validate their claims.
They founded a city, Nauvoo, as well, where Smith held significant power.
Yes, after facing opposition elsewhere, the Mormons founded Nauvoo, Illinois. The sources note the charter granted to Nauvoo gave Smith all but unlimited civil power as mayor and allowed him to organize a significant military body, the Nauvoo Legion, made him a powerful religious and political figure. After Smith's death in 1844, he was succeeded by Brigham Young, who led the Mormons to Utah. Described in the sources as having defied the federal government there, establishing a semi-autonomous territory. Brigham Young's death in 1877 is noted, with a detail that he left 17 wives and 56 children, reflecting the early Mormon practice of polygamy.
The sources also provide a rather graphic and unusual description of a Mormon ceremony, apparently sourced from a publication called the Rosicrucian.
They do. Describes a specific ritual. A naked candidate in a coffin-shaped tin bath, an elder blessing each body part as water touches it. A new name reportedly given during this immersion.
Okay.
Candidate is then led to a scene representing a garden with fruit trees, given another new name. Finally, taken to a room where naked men and women stand in a circle. In this setting, they're taught signs, words, and grips, and shown the ceremony of raising a man from the dead.
That's a striking and unusual ritual described in this source, portraying aspects of Mormon temple ceremonies very specifically, emphasizing elements like nakedness, symbolic death birth, and acquiring secret knowledge, signs, words, grips. Next, the B'nai B'rith.
The B'nai B'rith, or Independent Order of B'nai B'rith, discussed as founded in New York 1843 by a number of German Jews headed by Henry Jones. The sources analyze its structure, stating its constitution, district lodges, grand lodges, stamp it as a Jewish Masonic society, implying it adopts Freemasonry's organizational framework, but is specifically for Jewish members.
And its activities are described as having a political dimension despite a benevolent facade.
Yes, the source claims that, like most societies aiming for broader influence, B'nai B'rith covers its political activities under the cloak of benevolence and philanthropy. Its main contact is described as historically being with Germany, reflecting its founder's origins. And its chief aim is stated by the source as the establishment of the supremacy of the German Jews in all world affairs through the channel of internationalism.
Now that is, again, a highly controversial and specific claim made by the source material, alleging a specific ethnic and religious group is using this society, structured like Freemasonry, to achieve global dominance through internationalism. This is presented as a key objective of the B'nai B'rith in this source.
That's precisely the claim made in the material, presented as the source's interpretation of the organization's true aims. Moving to the Baha'i movement, founded 1844 by Mirza Ali Muhammad, the Bab, in Persia, now Iran.
What are its core claims as described here, especially its view of other religions and movements?
The Baha'i movement claims to be the fulfillment of previous religious dispensations, views figures like Buddha, Zoroaster, Jesus, Muhammad, Confucius, not as isolated prophets, but as manifestations of God, preparing the world for the most great peace, and the mighty world educator Baha'u'llah, who founded the movement after the Bab was executed. The source states the Baha'i movement claims to be the unity of all religions, also older and modern movements such as Theosophy, Freemasonry, spiritualism, socialism, etc.
So presenting itself as a culmination or synthesis, a unifying force for a wide range of religious, spiritual, even secular movements.
Yes, aiming at spiritual illumination, universal peace, universal religion, universal education, a universal language like Esperanto, and universal unity among all peoples. Reportedly requires adherents to abandon traditional racial, patriotic, religious, political prejudices, seeing them as barriers, and requires religions to accord with science and reason.
and a particular architectural detail of their temples is noted as having symbolic significance.
The Baha'is have temples worldwide. The source focuses on the one in Chicago, describes it as a perfect, nonagon, nine-sided building. Its dimensions reportedly based on the number 9, which the source explicitly calls the Kabbalistic number of generation. Stating this numerical symbolism leads to unity with the universal astrolight.
9 seems deeply significant, almost mystical for them, as described, representing generation and unity.
Their organizational structure also emphasizes 9. A guardian, hereditary head, with 9 co-workers, local town spiritual assemblies of 9 members to be consulted and absolutely obeyed, national assemblies, plans for an eventual universal assembly, all emphasizing 9.
Okay. Modern Spiritism, or spiritualism, which gained popularity in the 19th century, is also covered.
It is. Origins traced specifically to events involving Catherine and Margaret Fox in Hydesville, New York, 1848. These sisters reportedly developed a system of communication by raps with invisible entities, spirits of the dead.
Right, the Fox sisters.
However, the source immediately adds skepticism, stating both sisters eventually confessed to having abused public credulity and staged their seances.
Despite that, it gained traction in high society, even among political figures.
Yes. The sources mention its presence among upper classes and influential individuals, citing Sir Oliver Lodge lecturing at the Chancellor of the Exchequer's house, an anecdote involving Mrs. Philip Snowden, wife of a prominent Labour politician.
And the source makes a very pointed and quite extraordinary claim connecting Spiritism and other secret activities.
It presents a claim that's quite specific and startling, that Spiritism is the fundamental mystery of most secret societies and the drug traffic is its chief commercial secret.
Now wait, that's a bold, sweeping, and frankly unsubstantiated claim as presented here. Linking a spiritualist movement based on communicating with spirits to the core secrets of a vast array of other secret societies and to the international drug trade. Again, it is crucial we emphasize we are stating what the source claims here, not presenting it as established fact.
Precisely. That is the claim made in the material. The sources also mention a proposed spiritualism and psychical research exemption bill from 1930, reportedly promoted by socialist MPs in British Parliament.
What was that for?
Designed to relieve spiritualists and mediums from prosecution under old witchcraft and vagrancy laws while they were genuinely exercising their psychic powers, suggesting an attempt to legitimize mediumship legally. Legal cases involving spiritualism, challenging the authenticity of phenomena, are mentioned. Justice Darling is quoted commenting after one trial that it is an open question whether the manifestations given by mediums are genuine or mere tricks. The source also notes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's significant bequest to spiritualistic institutions, highlighting his deep belief despite public skepticism and legal challenges.
Suggests the movement faced legal scrutiny and skepticism, but had prominent supporters who believed in it. The youth movement is also discussed, particularly in America, and presented critically.
The youth movement in America is described not as natural adolescent energy, but as a social epidemic, linked by the source to the destructionist doctrines of the so-called New Psychology and modernistic theories on education. Its alleged aim, interpreted by the source, is to render American youth unfit to carry on the traditions and ideals of their fathers, suggesting a deliberate effort to subvert traditional values and social order.
And the source includes a cynical, almost satirical suggestion about the potential direction of American students in this movement.
Yes, quotes a satirical suggestion that American students might save their country by forming intellectual Soviets and establishing the dictatorship of the learner, or at least learn or teach in the ecstasy of demolition.
Ecstasy of demolition vividly captures the destructive energy the source attributes to this movement, and this is explicitly linked to communism.
Yes, the sources explicitly connect the youth movement to international communism. Quote, Grigory Zinoviev, chairman of the Young Communist International Movement, stating in 1923 the youth movement was the best section of the Communist International, viewing it as a key vector for spreading communist influence. Professor George Lykin is also quoted on the Russian League of Communist Youth accepting girls and boys and, according to him, reducing them to a low state of moral corruption, implying a deliberate effort to undermine traditional morality.
The source lists numerous associated organizations under the umbrella of the Youth Peace Federation in 1931, suggesting a coordinated effort across various groups focused on young people and peace.
It does, presenting this collective as familiar to any businessman in public life. The list includes various clubs, leagues, fellowships, associations, many with names suggesting peace, youth welfare, ethical culture. But they're presented by the source within the context of this alleged destructionist youth movement, linked to communism and an agenda of undermining national traditions.
Finally, in this section on religious, spiritual, and youth movements, a Japanese sect is mentioned. Tenri Kinjikai.
Tenri Kinjikai. Described as a Japanese politico-religious sect, presented as an offshoot of Shintoism. Explicitly called subversive by the source because adherents reportedly object strongly to military service and taxation, two fundamental duties of citizens.
Okay. And it's compared to some of the controversial figures leading other esoteric groups we've discussed.
Yes, the source notes a comparison of Eijiro Onishi, presumably a leader, to figures like Roos, Steiner, Crowley, Gurdjieff, and Piggott of the Abode of Love. The source quotes a claim about Onishi. He exacted a vow of poverty from adherents, took their property, then lived in luxury, concluding this point with the observation that greed on the one hand and human gullibility of dupes on the other lead to uniform results, suggesting a common pattern of leaders exploiting followers across these diverse movements.
This adds a global example to the theme of leaders allegedly exploiting followers under the guise of a religious or spiritual movement, connecting it back to figures associated with other secret societies discussed, and highlighting the source's skeptical view of such groups.
Indeed, it paints a picture of recurring patterns, as interpreted by the source.
We've explored a really wide array of groups described in these sources, from Irish rebels, European revolutionaries, to mystic orders like the Golden Dawn and O.T.O, theosophists claiming contact with world rulers, powerful international financiers like the BIS, political movements like the International and the Fabians, even movements focused on youth or specific ethnic religious groups. Now let's look at the overarching themes and the synthesis the source material itself presents, attempting to connect these seemingly disparate threads into a single narrative of hidden influence and control.
The source explicitly revisits that idea of centralized leadership and interconnectedness across these diverse organizations. It concludes, based on the patterns it identifies, that a great many societies seem to function towards the same goal under centralized leadership.
And the author presents a set of specific, quite provocative claims derived from this whole investigation, as detailed in the source material itself.
Yes. The source summarizes what it presents as the author's 6 principal claims, drawn from connecting the dots across all these groups and events.
Okay, what are they?
1. The union of secret societies across different spheres serves one central cause, unknown to most members.
Hidden cause. Got it.
2. This central control guiding them is hidden from public view, even from lower-level initiates.
Hidden control. Makes sense.
3. The ultimate aim of this hidden, centralized control is world domination.
The big one. World domination. Okay.
4. This hidden agenda operates specifically through Illuminism, a term the source uses for that stream of esoteric occult influence, often linked to groups like the O.T.O, and its claimed synthesis of secret knowledge.
Illuminism as the method.
5. The primary lever through which this hidden power operates is international finance.
Finance is the main tool.
Right.
Right.
And 6, this control is exercised not just directly, but by permeating and using existing structures, political parties, conservative, liberal, radical, socialist, suggesting influence across the board, and through internationally organized corruption, citing examples like white slave traffic, vice drug rings as tools or revenue streams for this network.
Those are incredibly broad, serious, and deeply controversial claims about a hidden, centrally controlled network aiming for world domination through financial manipulation, political infiltration, and international corruption. These are presented explicitly as the author's conclusions in this source material, drawing connections between all the groups and phenomena we've discussed.
Precisely. The source returns repeatedly to emphasizing money as the most powerful lever for these hidden forces, the main sinew of political organizations, suggesting even overt political action is ultimately fueled and controlled by financial power. It explicitly compares the electoral system in democracies to an auction favoring the highest bidder, suggesting political outcomes are bought and sold, reinforcing the idea that real power lies with those controlling finance.
And it identifies research into finance as the essential path to tracing the real power behind these events.
Yes, stating research in finance becomes indispensable for students trying to trace the real power behind universal control, implying following the money is key to uncovering the structure and individuals behind this alleged network. And then, the source makes its most direct, specific, and highly controversial assertion regarding the identity of this power,
which is stated as being wholly in the hands of international Jewish financiers.
That is what the source states. It claims this power, they will find, is wholly in the hands of international Jewish financiers. It immediately follows this by explicitly noting the highly controversial nature of this claim.
Again, it is absolutely critical for everyone listening to understand that this is the explicit, highly controversial claim made by the author within the source material as their ultimate conclusion about the nature and identity of the hidden power they describe controlling these networks. We're relaying precisely what is written in the source, including its own note about the controversiality.
It is presented by the source as the central finding of its investigation. The source then reiterates the idea that finance is power, calling it the arbiter of war and peace, life and death, welfare and wretchedness, prosperity and ruin, highlighting its capacity for immense destructive and constructive influence over global events and human lives.
And the source suggests most people have a price, making them susceptible to being used or controlled.
Yes, stating almost everybody has a price and can be bought, though not always with money, suggests the men wielding financial power today have based their system of purchase and control on this axiom, the idea that human motivations like ambition, greed, or other desires can be leveraged.
It contrasts idealists with those who are used by this power, suggesting even well-intentioned people can be manipulated.
It does, suggesting idealists genuinely believing in a cause can be manipulated and used by men who today wield financial power, or by the secret of the order itself, which instills a super-religion of the secret, a belief system centered on hidden knowledge and loyalty to the order above all else. The source concludes the true fight, according to this view, should be waged specifically against this secret power structure.
The source also questions the very need for secrecy in these societies if their stated aims are genuinely good.
Poses this question directly. If the aims of secret societies are good, one fails to see the need for their secret oaths and initiations, then evokes that, quote, attributed to Christ, who lighteth a candle and putteth it under a bushel, suggesting good works or beneficial knowledge should be shared openly, not hidden. The source concludes from this that Masonic and secret societies need light, implying their secrecy is evidence of something hidden or nefarious.
So arguing secrecy itself is suspicious, implies something's being concealed that wouldn't stand up to public scrutiny.
That's the argument presented regarding secret societies. The source also discusses indiscriminate toleration as being used as an exoteric basis, an outer, publicly acceptable principle for subversive creeds.
How does that work, according to the source?
Suggests sects and secret orders might induce novices to surrender their natural power to discriminate between good and evil, creating a dangerous negative state of mind easily swayed, like in hypnotism, by others' will. In this view, promoting broad, unquestioning toleration paralyzes opposition to evil, serving an esoteric purpose suspected by few, the purpose being to stop individuals recognizing and resisting the hidden harmful agendas of the controlling core.
So the source is claiming that promoting general tolerance as a virtue is actually a deceptive tactic used by these groups to disarm potential opposition to their hidden harmful agendas. By making people unwilling or unable to judge and resist perceived evil, as interpreted by the author?
That's the provocative interpretation presented regarding toleration, positioning it not as a universal good, but as a potential tool for manipulation by hidden powers. Finally, the appendix mentioned in the outline reinforces some points about the O.T.O. and the symbolic language used within these traditions.
What additional details does that appendix provide relevant to the source's overall claims?
The appendix is presented as consolidating knowledge about the O.T.O. Reinforcing the claim, it concentrates the wisdom and structure of various bodies we've discussed: Gnostic Church, Illuminati, Masonic rites, Theosophy, etc. It details the degree structure, 0 to X, O.H.O., lists fees, $20 for third-degree mention plus annual subscriptions, and rules, like no lawsuits between members, disputes referred to an internal grand tribunal.
And privileges listed for members seem to emphasize mutual support and advantage.
Yes. Privileges include being a brother, cooperation in pleasures, care in sickness, help finding work, social advantages, aiding each other in trades businesses. Suggests the order provides a practical network of mutual support. The degrees are further described as organized into 3 triads: man of earth, lovers, hermits, reflecting stages of esoteric development.
And the governance structure within the O.T.O. is detailed.
Governance described through bodies like Chapter of Rosicruciana, Senate Electoral College, Grand Tribunal, Supreme Grand Council, Areopagus, Sanctuary of the Gnosis. Notably, the source quotes the O.T.O.'s view that popular election within the order is fatal folly, producing mediocrity, implying a self-selecting or appointed leadership, not democratic, Also notes requirements for higher degrees, inducing new members, vesting property in the order, suggesting the order seeks to grow membership and accumulate assets.
The appendix also defines key symbols and terms, often with interpretations linking back to the source's claims about the O.T.O's nature.
Yes, provides definitions for symbols like Shambhala, abode of Mahatmas, Kundalini, again linked to sex force, serpent power, sword, rose, linked to female genitals, vulva, flamboyant star, emblem of generation, also Lucifer, Holy Grail, linked to female organ, swastika, normal reverse, linked to magic, Yima's piercer, phallus, compass, masculinity, phallus, square, female genitals lodge, triangle, male-female, good devil, delta, tetragrammaton, Jewish Freemasonic name of God, yod, phallus, tau, cross, crux, ansata, ankh, union of male-female, fecundity, crux decusata, St. Andrew's cross.
The explicit linking of these widespread esoteric and religious symbols to sexual and generative organs, as well as figures like Lucifer, reinforces the source's earlier claims about the O.T.O's focus on a phallic religion and its potentially transgressive nature.
It does, presenting these symbols as having a consistent, often physical or sexualized esoteric meaning within these traditions, according to the source's interpretation, and positioning them as central to the secret knowledge.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We've covered this vast landscape of groups as described in these sources. Irish rebels, European revolutionaries, mystic orders like Golden Dawn and O.T.O, Theosophists claiming contact with world rulers, powerful international financiers like the BIS, political movements like the International and the Fabians, even movements focused on youth or specific ethnic religious groups. The sources describe them not as isolated, but as interconnected threads in a larger tapestry of influence and control, guided by hidden leadership, aiming for world domination through Illuminism and international finance.
We've seen claims of hidden aims like the annihilation of Christianity attributed to Carbonarism, shocking alleged practices within groups like the O.T.O, including theoretical justification for human sacrifice for spiritual ends, political manipulation through infiltration, elections, even media control, and a persistent thread of power operating behind the scenes, often tied to finance and, as the source controversially claims, specific ethnic religious groups.
So what does this all mean, based on these sources? They present a view of history where visible events, revolutions, wars, government changes, economic policies are often driven by unseen hands and secret agendas, with a claimed ultimate goal of world domination and imposing a specific order, maybe even a phallic religion, operating through manipulation and control of various spheres.
It certainly makes you look at the world a bit differently, doesn't it? Challenges those conventional narratives. It forces you to consider the possibility of deliberate, long-term plans unfolding across generations and continents, guided by hidden forces, rather than just the chaotic interplay of known political, social, economic factors we usually study.
Which raises a huge question. If these sources are accurate in their claims, the widespread interconnectedness, the hidden control via Illuminism and international finance, the specific aims and methods attributed to these diverse groups, from political conspiracy to esoteric practices and alleged world governance agendas, what are the implications for our understanding of history, the nature of power in the world, even the perceived reality we live in?
It suggests that perhaps the most significant forces shaping our world operate on levels we aren't really trained to perceive, concealed behind layers of secrecy, ritual, and public facade.
Something for you to definitely mull over as you continue your own deep dives.